I'm Neil Krause. I'm a professor of political science at UW River Falls. I'm also the president of our campus chapter of AFT Wisconsin, United Falcons. And I want to talk a little bit about the UW system and higher ed generally, and how we see the situation that we're currently facing. And I think it does fit nicely with sort of the continuum between pre-K and K-12 all into public higher education. Just a little bit of background. I mean, everybody's familiar with how the Walker years went for the UW. It was more or less a disaster, and there were massive budget cuts, and it really had permanent negative effects on our campuses, and certainly on my campus, River Falls. I've been at River Falls since 2005. Incidentally, I moved around a little bit before I came to River Falls, and I'm from upstate New York, and lived in Louisiana as well. And I currently live in Minnesota, so I had perspectives from several different states on a lot of this stuff. So Governor Evers was elected, and I think a lot of us were very hopeful, because the Board of Regents, of course, under the Walker administration, did a lot of very negative things to the system as well. It wasn't just the legislature in terms of defunding us. Unfortunately, the Board of Regents under Governor Evers, President Rothman, had been marginally better, I think is about all I would say. They're still operating from this paradigm of austerity and the necessity of cutting budgets, and really have the same priorities that the Republicans did. Online education, basically shrinking the comprehensives and closing the two-year schools. Those are the policies of the Republican Party, and they're more or less, not more or less, they are the policies of the majority of the Board of Regents right now, which is, a majority is appointed by Governor Evers, and President Rothman is right there with them on these sorts of priorities. And, I just came from the session next door, and I wanted to pick up on one of the themes. Jennifer Berkshire and really all the participants talked about how dreadfully unpopular the K-12 agenda is in terms of charters, vouchers. I would go much further, accountability, standardized tests. The book that I wrote, published last year, called The Fantasy Economy, really talks about the politics of the education reform movement and in K-12 and in higher ed. And it's a political movement at its core. Essentially trying to convince people that charters and vouchers and high-stakes testing really aren't that unpopular, but it's never worked. They're actually quite unpopular. Today we see the same things in higher ed. There's an attempt to sort of impose on a massive scale, online education. It's done through austerity, right? The state's no longer funding us, so we must go online. I mean, that's the argument that we're hearing on campus about online ed. Even industry doesn't try to pretend it's popular anymore, because they can't. It's been around for 30 years. It's being imposed in places like Wisconsin and elsewhere because budgets are being cut. I mean, it's really that simple. And I started writing my book, and I was involved in a lot of stuff on our campus in 2015, 2016, 2017. And a lot of stuff was happening at UW Stevens Point, right? I think all of you probably recall that. It got national attention. Stevens Point was going to get rid of like 13 majors or something. New York Times covered it. It was a big deal. And at the time, my book was just about K-12. And I had started writing it. But then I started to look into all these labor market numbers. Like STEM's all the rage, we all know that. And other kinds of things. And I found it, that's why the title is The Fantasy Economy. I found that pretty much all the conventional wisdom is wrong. There's never been a shortage of STEM workers. There's not even close. There's been a surplus of STEM workers in this country for 30-some years. There's not, unfortunately, but it explains the politics of it, there's not a shortage of really any workers who have a 4-year degree or better. There's a surplus. The politics of higher ed made no sense to me. This is why I wrote the book. On the one hand, we have something everybody ostensibly needs. We have higher education, right? And I'm a political scientist. If you have something everybody needs, let's say you're a campaign committee, then you have built-in power. Everybody's coming to you. You can't be screwed with. We have no power. You can cut our budgets. You can get rid of tenure. You can do whatever you want. You won't lose votes. You might even gain votes. What the hell's going on? How can that be? And I started looking up labor market numbers, and it's like 10 light bulbs. Oh, I see. Because a third of bachelor's degree holders have been underemployed for 30 plus years. That might have something to do with it. It's very easy to mobilize opposition to higher ed. Because what happened, this is really the story of the book, what happened in the 80s, and Jennifer talked about this in the top what happened was the Reagan administration, through funded research, primarily, changed the mission of education. They explicitly changed it to basically be from previously, there was some connection to, your livelihood. I mean, in the 1950s, doctors made more than bricklayers. That's true, right? But what happened with neoliberalism in the 1980s is basically, corporate America and primarily the Republican Party, Democrats went along for the most part. They changed the mission. They put it all on education. The economic opportunity, your labor market outcomes, all of that was now the function of first K-12 and now higher ed, right? That's why we're always on defense. That's why we're always losing, because we're held responsible for something that we can't do, right? And the examples I give, if you were to give everybody in Wisconsin a bachelor's degree right now, just boom, done. What do we think would happen? I'll tell you what happened. We would probably shut down 3 or 4 comprehensives within 5 years. Most of the 2-year schools will be shut down. Why do I say that? Because the labor market is the labor market. We're building Amazon warehouses in every town in America. We're building super targets, right? Retail, food services, home health care. These are the jobs that dominate our economy. Corporate America has done this sort of bait and switch. They've shifted the whole discussion of economic opportunity onto us. That's a framing that we necessarily lose. That's heads I win, tails you lose. Right? That's why we're always getting killed. That's why you can't go out and go to Wausau or River Falls or any place else in the state and start talking about education is the key to economic opportunity, blah, blah, blah. Sure, for some people, but for a lot of people it's not. It can't be, because there aren't enough jobs for people as it is with 4-year, let alone advanced degrees, right? And so that's why the book is called The Fantasy Economy, and it's really it's basically a story of 2 sets of numbers and a political campaign, right? A political campaign that started, again, in K-12, but now, really, a Great Recession, it's been made about us. It's been made about higher education. Right? And, I'll say something, keeping track, I think 1:30 minutes, so it doesn't dig. I'll be done in a minute. But just something real quick about the politics of all this. Business is going to represent business. That's fine. That's fine. But when CEOs, like on the committee we just talked about, come and say they can't find enough skilled workers, it's in their interest to say that. It doesn't mean they're bad people. People caricature what I'm saying. Oh, you're saying they're lying. You're saying they're... No, I'm saying they're representing their interests. And it's always in their interest to say, we just can't find enough skilled workers. Unemployment can be 25%, folks. And you can go down to the Chamber of Commerce, they're going to say, we've looked under rocks. We've looked behind barns. They're just not there. See, the thing is about labor markets, they actually work. When there's a real shortage, wages are way up. That's fine. Business is going to represent business. Business people are all over my immediate extended family. Lots of good friends. Relatives, etc. But in higher ed and in the UWs, this is when business comes in and says that, we start redoing the whole, we start redoing everything. Oh, yeah, let's get rid of the English major. We don't need some science jobs. We're doing philosophy shit, that's right. We need your studying programs. Nobody checks the data. And this is in Rothman's language, and I'll conclude on this. He'll say, This is what business tells us. This is what he will say. That's great. I'm sure they tell you that. I take it your word. But there needs to be, and AFT Wisconsin is, to my knowledge, the only organization that's pushing back against austerity, against permanent budget cuts, against what's happening in the nervous system right now. And that's why I'm proud to be a member of it. And on August 22nd, AFT is going to have a press conference coinciding with the Board of Regents meeting in Madison. The Board of Regents meeting where they're going to officially lay off a bunch of tenured faculty for UW Milwaukee. I invite all of you to it, and we're very much looking forward to that event. Of course, we're going to get our budgets cut, and we're being held responsible for people's paychecks, which we can't, by definition, affect. Right? Of course, that's the default paradigm, austerity. And as I'm sure you guys are going to talk about right now, there's tons of money. There's tons of money. There's a state surplus, biggest in history. One last point before I forget. There's tons of money being spent by the UW on tech and on consultants. We never, ever, ever say no to technology. That's higher ed across the board. Ever. We can't. We're constitutionally unable. It'd be the best job in the world to be a tech vendor, to be a tech salesperson. You can't lose. You can't lose. Yeah, and when I lose my job, maybe I'll change my perspective. But anyway, I'll stop there, and I look forward to the conversation.
All right, so I'm going to start even a little backwards because I'm going to give a brief history. So I'm Corinne Hendrickson. I am a family child care professional in New Glarus, Wisconsin. This is my 17th year as the lead of my program. About 4 years ago, Rick and I started Wisconsin Early Childhood Action Needed, which is a grassroots group of child care professionals, parents, community members, small business owners, and others who care about the care and education of young children and other things to go with early childhood. So we're also pushing for paid family medical leave and universal health care because, again, those things impact young children. And so before that, we advocated for inclusion of children with special needs and getting the information out to parents so that they understood what inclusion really means and how they can advocate for better IEPs and IFSPs, which is their programs for their children to get the supports that they need, and ensure that they're even getting the correct assessments done. And so we started that about 10 years ago, and then we morphed into now this overall, hey, it's actually about the funding and the wages. That's the biggest issue. And so what we've been doing is coming together and really working to organize people to help them understand our culture and society says if you are a woman, if you make low wages, you are low status, you don't mean much, because that's how we're looked at. We're constantly accused of being babysitters, that anybody can do this job. Speaking of Republicans, their solutions, instead of investing in child care by continuing the child care accounts funding, which kept us afloat and continues to keep us afloat fairly, was more children. Because every parent wants their child to be around more children and have higher ratios. I constantly hear from parents that they think I should probably take twice as many. Just kidding, absolutely not. That's the opposite of what parents want. Because in order for us to make more money and increase our revenue, the solution clearly is just take on more children. Never mind that I'm already working hard enough. I don't need to work harder to maintain my as a family child care provider, $10 an hour wage, $13 average for our group center employees. And so we've been really working on empowering each other, telling each other we do matter, we're important, and that we can and should come together and we can and should demand better of our elected representatives. And I'm going to let Brooke talk a little bit more about the early education piece.
So I am Brooke Wegler. I am the group center and director of a child care program at New Glarus. So yes, what Karina said is correct. We've been working together for quite a while. And I went into this field. I first went into created the center because I lacked child care for my own 2 young daughters at the time. And I went into it with pretty much no experience. So it was kind of like, it was new to me. And very eye-opening. I was naive, thinking that we took care of our most vulnerable populations, and I quickly found out we did not. I had children, as she said, it started out with children that had these additional needs, disabilities. I'm like, I need help, I have this child 50 hours a week. The child has Down syndrome. That was my first, and I'm like, okay, like, reaching out, what do you have available to me? Because when she's in school, she has a full-time aide. I have her all summer, like, and I got back nothing. We don't have anything for you. Like, okay. And then I realized later on, because her parents didn't tell me, but she had been kicked out of the previous child care program because that is what we do in early child care. We don't have the resources, so we expel the children at a rate 4 times that of the K-12 system. And it's such a disservice to our state, our children, especially when we consider 90% of brain development occurs before the age of 5. So these are the foundation years. These are the most critical years of determining what that person is going to be like, what they are going to grow in, make or break. And when I say that, if we fail, K through 12 fails. If K through 12 fails, the upper education fails. If we can't take care of our children at this young age, it's just a domino effect. We know that children that experience quality early child care are more likely to graduate from high school, more likely to be healthier, to go on to college, to have higher income bases. So with that said, knowing how critical those years are, then we need to look at that profession. And it is female dominated, and that is a problem for our country. That is female dominated because the average wage in Wisconsin for an early child care provider is $11 to $13 an hour. We can't live off of that. More than half of us work full-time and are on some form of assistance in Wisconsin. Yet 80% of us have secondary education. 52% have an associate's degree in Wisconsin for the profession. So when we look at that, the wage, and as Corrine had touched on, we are equated to babysitters. We sat in hearings this whole year and were right to our face. You were in one of the meetings where our profession was questioned, like we're not professionals, what we were told. And that's hurtful. And not only is it hurtful to me and my profession, but that hurts the children that we serve. Because when we are dismissive towards us as a profession, then you are dismissive towards the children that we serve. And so that's where you get the general public thinking like, oh, they can't remember, it doesn't matter. People don't seem to understand that those experiences that children have changes the biology of them. It changes the brain of them. Those experiences change them. And so equating our profession to low status then makes us not fund the early child care. Our state provides zero funding. We provide nothing for early child care education in the state of Wisconsin. And that's shameful because that's a choice. We are making that as a choice. Especially knowing, we have the $1 billion surplus as a choice that we're making to, let's fund the brewers. That was a choice. Where should our money go? And it's our money. It's our tax money. So we are making a choice. We are voting in people to make those choices, and that's what they have done. So I think it's very important that we focus on the wages because with early child care, I know a lot of people don't equate care as education, but it is. And that, for us to really reach the children, it's our relationship with them. So we need to have teachers in the classroom with the children or in the home with the children that maybe aren't stressed, maybe don't have to work 2 jobs.
Don't have to bartend until 2 a.m. and then get up and
Maybe.
eat your children.
Yeah.
The next day.
Maybe we can have better relationships with those children. maybe we can have relationships that last, because the turnover rate is huge in early childcare. I can't keep teachers at my program. I am 50% staffed still since COVID hit. I can't. And I've raised our wages because of childcare counts. Childcare counts needed to raise wages, that's part of it, and that should be, absolutely. We went from $11 to $13 as our average. Still very shameful. But now childcare counts was cut in half. Am I supposed to take that dollar away back from my teachers? So we're seeing the closures again. It's happening again because our representatives chose 10 times to vote down childcare counts. They were given 10 times the opportunity to try to pass it, and they declined the measure, which was $376 million.
Something like that.
And so we're losing out. We lose billions of dollars a year as a state because of the lack of childcare, and we're losing even more. And if you want to consider like Wisconsin with our next door neighbor, Minnesota, we have very similar demographics, similar populations. We have less than half the child care providers that Minnesota has. And that's because Minnesota has started to create more family friendly. They put $1 billion into their child care this past year. Like, they're doing it right. And they're going to see the benefits for a long time to come. Because a dollar investment is a $7 to $16 return. With the $16, the younger the child. So that tells you right there how critical it is that we reach these young children. And we're not doing it. Like Kareen had said, the legislation that was brought to save us, to help us, to have more children per teacher. Like, I can't think of a faster way to get rid of my teachers.
And to plummet the birth rate, because I'm sorry, if you leave 16-year-olds alone in a classroom with 6 1-year-olds, they're not coming back. They're not going to be somebody, it's not an apprenticeship, they're not going to stay. They're not having children after that experience. That's the last thing they're going to want to do. Because those were the solutions that they were giving. A 16-year-old could be alone in a classroom as long as another adult was on premise, somewhere in the building, somewhere on the property. And that was the amendment. The original was they could be alone.
And the thing, Karina and I were just talking on our way here. I was telling him about a family situation. And then we were like, yeah, imagine a 16-year-old where I have to speak to the dad's lawyer, the mom's lawyer, the guardian ad litem, and I have the children that are experiencing this, that just finally got off of supervised vision or supervision with their dad. And there was a reason why it had to be supervised. And we see the behaviors because of this. I see the tantrums, because they're facing adversity and they don't know how to handle it. Can you imagine a 16-year-old trying to like work through that, trying to understand that behavior, the reason for that? And that's what we have to do as professionals. And we need those quality relationships. We need that consistency. We can teach the children resilience for the adversity that they're experiencing. We can teach them that they are worthy, that they are loved. That is huge. We tell our children that they are loved. And that is important because not all children are hearing that.
And it goes back to the care is education. In the K-12 system, if a child does not feel that they are cared for and like that teacher likes them, they are not going to learn anything in that classroom either. And that seems to be part of some of this like hierarchical, like teachers are always like, we don't care for the kid. It's like, we're not child care, we're not babysitters, but you care for and educate. And then part of that, having that conversation is, again, it's because we're getting pitted against each other, because we seem to think as a society there's a small pie that we all have to fight over. And instead of coming together, which is I'm glad we're here, coming together to say, no, this is not okay. We are all educators. We are all important in the trajectory of these children's lives. We all need each other, because without us, those teachers can't teach. I think Dr. Underly said it was one of the top 3 reasons we're losing teachers in the K-12. They can't find childcare. And then some of the solutions that our school districts are coming up with, which is to like take 4K all day or to take on 3-year-olds, is actually undercutting and hurting the rest of the system, because you're pulling out the kids that are needed to keep us afloat, again, because we're not funded properly. And it's creating even exacerbating the problem even more, instead of us coming together, sitting at the table and say, how can we strengthen our community at this time using our regulated childcare, our family friends and neighbors, our K through 12s, and our colleges. How can we come together to make sure that we have a system that works for everyone? But instead, we're too busy trying to keep our little portion of power, and we can't seem to get past that. And I feel like it's starting to break down a little bit, and that we're starting to kind of come through and say, you know what, this isn't working for any of us, and we need to come up with a different way. In our colleges, UW-Milwaukee no longer offers childcare classes, early care and education classes. They've dropped it. Many schools or colleges are dropping it and have dropped it. And yes, online is okay, but when some professions like sociology, psychology, you need that face-to-face interaction. It's not the same when you're on a screen. It's not the same when you're not in a room using the manipulatives and having those conversations.
And hard to teach relationships.
Yes.
Relationships.
Yes, definitely. So yeah, with that, any questions?
Open it up for conversation.
I want to also make clear that early intervention is not a thing that we do in Wisconsin.
You claim to, but it's significantly underfunded. It goes back to that special education piece. Most school districts, instead of doing inclusion and coming into our programs, are now creating their own exclusionary programs at the district. And our state is one of the worst as far as inclusion of children with special needs. Like, we're in the bottom. I think less than 10% of our kids are actually in inclusive environments.
We struggle with school districts if you have a child with an IEP, because when a child turns 3,
That's your bus. You're supposed to be driving a bus, Brooke. That happens to her every time.
you drive the bus. It does happen every time. Yes, IEPs. So when a child is 3, so birth to 3 is birth to 3 programming, which is failing. Like, no fault of their own. They're not, they don't have the resources. At most, we get an hour a week for a child. And when you have a child with significant development delays, who is nonverbal, who's aggressive, things like that, an hour a week when we have them 50 hours, like, that doesn't cut it. It almost makes it worse.
For support. So for therapy, whether it's speech,
Somebody
OT, or they pull the child out.
Usually
they pull them out, which they're not supposed to.
And
That's
then-
like the opposite.
That's what you're saying,
Yes.
you pull them out, bring them to the public school. and
Yes, and then bring them back.
which is worse because typically children with additional needs, transitions can be very difficult. And then they're not in an environment, their inclusive environment with their peers. And that, again, is not good. That's another mark against us.
And then the teacher isn't seeing the therapy supports that are happening, so we cannot continue those then within our, and reinforce it, and then talk to the parents about how this is happening.
And then 3 years old, it's an IEP. The school districts that they live in, that a child lives in, is then responsible for the support for a child. And my experience is that I am often told, let's wait until they get to school. It's like, okay, there goes, 2 years of, like, we're missing out, and I need help. And then, of course, summers, their disabilities disappear. So that's always been a struggle. And I'm not saying this to be unkind. I'm saying it because we need the resources to continue that support. You should never stop therapy for 3 months. Like, it's not good. But we can't get the resources. We don't. So I have children that have full-time support when they're in school and nothing when they're with me. Because we're not worthy of it, is basically kind of what it comes down to.
Well, and funding, we just don't fund it how we need to fund it. And that's at the federal level, down to the state. In the 90s, the per pupil funding, the last thing I saw, was about double what we get now from the feds. So, I mean, that's right there a bit. And part of the excuse is, well, COVID. No, COVID didn't cause these issues. It revealed some of them, but it did not cause these issues. We were seeing the uptake in kids with special needs well before COVID, and a lot of it's relationships, interactions with their parents. The screen time is ridiculous. Like, I go to the grocery store, and these kids just are the whole time. And my kids at that age were getting me the apples and the bananas and everything, and parents were looking at me like, how do you get them to do that? I'm like, I don't hand them a tablet. Like, they're helping me. So, I mean, and a lot of it too then comes down to the relationship. So as child care professionals, we work with the parents on how to parent and when they have questions, because kids don't come with owner's manuals. So we've got some fact sheets for you. These are hot off the press, like this first 5 years fund. It talks about that funding on here. Was just this last week that it came out. And then the NIEER is our state's report card for 4K. We offer it to all children, but we have the worst, we need the least amount of benchmarks of anybody in the entire country. So that's, again, something that we need to look at. And most of the other states have a much better community collaboration where the school districts and the child cares work together to offer child care, early care and education, 4K. It's the same thing in a variety of places so that it strengthens the system. We're not needing more classrooms. We're not needing to add an entire playground for kids to meet the needs of 4-year-olds. Is very different than a second grader or third grader. And then in bathrooms, lunchrooms, none of those exist that are the right size for these kids. And I get the idea of adding younger children into the K-12 just because that's our brains, and our brains think public funding starts once they go to the big school. But we need to stop that. We need to start thinking public funding, public education. Our state constitution does not say there's a certain age that it starts. It just says free and appropriate public education. Why aren't we starting it?
4 years.
It says 4 years.
It does say 4?
Yeah.
I think it was added, like, yeah, it's amended, it's not on the.
Okay, it wasn't.
No, it's in Article 3.
Okay. So,
It does
yeah.
go to
Article
20.
10
It does, yes, and it goes up to 20.
It goes to 20 and not
Right.
through senior year.
Yeah, so 20 would be those first 2 years of community college. Yes, thank you.
4 to 20.
Yep, so we need to look at it and say that education begins prenatally, honestly, but really, and get that paid family leave so those parents can have that great relationship and, nurturing environment and know how to parent a little, for that, a little bit of time before the children go off to a program of the parents choosing family group, whatever kind of fits their needs and hours and things that they want. So we went off on a tangent. Anything else?
I have a question for you, if you don't mind, maybe twofold. So, how do we craft a narrative that combats maybe the anger or disappointment that college graduates feel if they aren't able to get a job in their field within a reasonable time frame? We always hear that college graduate as a barista and angry at the university because they didn't get the job they wanted. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, it's very hard. And I realized after I talked, I tried to put 270 pages in 8 minutes. And I just want to say something before I address that real quick. I support, and AFT supports, free public higher education. I believe everyone should have access to free public higher education, 2-year, 4-year, whatever, right? So when I talked about what if we gave everybody a 4-year degree, what would happen, I'm talking about the politics of it in the labor market. That's what I'm talking about, just to be clear. Because another thing, people misunderstand what I say, they misunderstand John Sheldon, well, you guys are opposed to education. No, that's exactly wrong. We're trying to figure out the politics of it. Why are we always getting killed politically? We just killed a little bit less in redemption power, right? Because education has been called out to do things that we can't do, basically. Back to your question, I mean, that's tough, but it has to start with higher ed and policymakers have to talk differently about the purposes of higher ed. We have to. We cannot talk about, if you listen to business leaders, they've been on point for 40 years. The word workforce is in every other sentence. Every other sentence in the press conference. Every other sentence, workforce, labor. We have to talk differently. We have to talk about, the many purposes of education and democracy, about human growth, about becoming a better citizen, concede. I mean, the worst thing we can do is not concede that the labor market sucks. I mean, it does, right? But when we pretend otherwise, we open ourselves up, we being higher ed, we open ourselves up for all these attacks. So then it's our failure. We failed the kid who's born from the reason, right? We didn't fail them. They didn't fail themselves, right? The labor market is tough. I think we have to concede that. But then we have to talk about the many purposes of higher education. I think that's key. Higher ed talks about higher ed in a terrible way. We're digging our grave every single day, right? Because we just adopted all the language of business. But also, I think we have to make public higher education much less expensive. So if they are working as a barista, they're not paying back $50,000 in student loans for a 4-year degree from a public institution. Right? Because, and what's part of the message too? The part of the message is we need labor unions because the jobs are the jobs, as I like to say. The jobs are the jobs. We're not going to not have warehouses anytime soon. The day we don't have warehouses is the day the world is not made up of crap that we all buy and is shipped in the mail. It's just not going to happen, right? Is there anything usable there? I think we have to concede that the labor market is challenging. We have to concede that. We have to talk about the many purposes of higher education, that it's not simply about getting a job, that it shouldn't be about that. And also, I think higher ed and policymakers have to go on offense and say, hey, you know what? It's not the ed school's fault that beginning teachers are making $38,000 a year in 2024. That's not the ed school's fault. It's not my fault that Nick makes not very much money because political science majors, as legislative staffers, have had their wages held down for 20 years. That's not my fault. I think I'm okay, right? It's not John Sheldon's fault that somebody with a history degree at Green Bay is working at an archives and his or her wages have been held down for 20 years. That's not their fault. That's not the history department's fault, right? So some of it is shifting the debate in those terms and saying, we can't set wages. We can't determine jobs, right? And there are lots of reasons why you pursue higher education. And yes, we ought to make higher education as inexpensive as possible. And yes, we ought to have loan forgiveness. And yes, we ought to fully fund public higher education in order to bring the price down. There's a lot there. I realize it's tough. But at the same time, I realize that higher ed, the way it talks about itself, we're just digging our own grave. We're digging our own grave, right? And is that, you know what I mean?
That was the second.
I was just saying, can I just follow up on that?
Yeah.
I think what you said earlier was you kind of tagged it to the rise of the neoliberalism, particularly in the 1980s.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, there was a time where the idea was that you went to college to become an educated person.
Yeah,
That education was its own reward, not
yeah.
job preparation. Yes, that might prepare you for a job, but you were becoming an educated person. Do you think, and occasionally you still hear people talking
Yeah.
about it, but do you think that given how entrenched that linkage now is between higher education and jobs, that education for its own sake or a return to that notion of an educated citizenry is possible, or do you think that has?
I don't think it's impossible. I think it would have to take place within the context of a whole bunch of other things. I think it would have to take place within the context of, let's raise the minimum wage for the first time since the 1990s, right at the federal level. Let's stop fighting to the death to prevent labor unions from forming. Because otherwise it would just become the province of the wealthy who would say that. That's all well and good, but it would have to take place in a shift in the political economy. And I think we're moving in a direction like that. The public is way ahead of higher ed. The public is living in the real economy. Higher ed is in what I call the fantasy economy, right? Operating on the education. One thing I found in my research, the Reagan people, Gates, Pew, all these huge players in the last 4 years, they have funded, it's just so obvious and so brilliant at the same time. They have funded all this research in ed schools, at Columbia, and all these other schools. And there's our skills camp. We'll put out 10,000 reports, we'll flood the zone, every newspaper in the United States, Business Roundtable, everybody else, and before you know it, I graduated from high school in 1986 in upstate New York. That was all we heard. That's why the plant shut down in Syracuse and Buffalo and Albany. That's why, because they couldn't find enough skilled workers. It just became a given.
skilled workers that would work for the amount they were
Yeah,
paid.
yeah, no, I mean, it was all just pure politics. It was all just pure politics, but the ed community really bought it. The public was skeptical, but I understand why the ed community bought it, because business made sure, and this is why the Chronicle is so, I can't even read the Chronicle, we're inside Iowa. And I can't get near them, because they're bad for my cardiovascular system. I mean, Gates, Lumina, they all do. They fund the Education Writers Association. Just look at their website, this is top secret. The Chronicle, Higher Ed, Inside Higher Ed, they're flooded with Gates money. Now what is the Gates agenda? Send everybody to Higher Ed and talk only about, the only source of opportunity in our society is higher education. Is education, specifically higher education. That's just human capital theory 101. I mean, I don't think it's impossible, but I think it would, back to the question, I think it would have to take place within a broader shift in a lot of these things. Policies, unions, things like that.
When I came here, I thought I was just gonna hang out afterwards and try to get Neil's ear for my comment, but now after hearing you guys talk, I think I need to very quickly throw out some of my thinking. Not to have answers, but just to get responses. In 2023, in Madison, Wisconsin, but I'm pretty sure that the other four, the big five in Wisconsin, Racine, Kenosha, Madison, Milwaukee, Green Bay. That's what Governor Evers talks about. Okay, I'm pretty sure that these numbers are similar. In 2023, graduates from white graduates who accepted diplomas in Madison, 6 out of 10 of those white graduates read at the proficient or higher level, and 40% were below basic or below basic, using similar tools, using the regular annual tools. 1 out of 10 students identifying as Black read at the proficient or higher level. Slightly higher for people identifying as Hispanic. For people with IEPs, less than 5%. Accepted diplomas, reading at the basic or below basic level. When I go to the Capitol and I talk to leaders, the notion of earning credits, which is what you get after earning or you get a diploma, knowing that you can earn credits without being able to read, just boggles their thinking. They have no idea that was even possible. And then having a diploma without being able to read at a proficient level also stumps them. They just didn't think that was possible. So the notion of how those statistics of not so much education, but literacy, being able to read the amendments on our next
Yes, and understand it, and comprehend it.
a rental agreement, medical agreement as far as who's going to pay the bills. Goes on and on. The words of this, if we know people are leaving secondary education not being able to read these words, that has to, and you must have been seeing that evidence
Yes, absolutely.
in your worlds. And how, and not answers, just responses. You see it? Because our numbers show.
Just real quick, I don't know if we know that. I don't know if we know what you say. I mean,
The PPI number dashboard numbers, that's what I.
well, let me back up. Proficient is a word. Whether or not they could read that is a separate thing.
Yes.
And in my book, I rely mainly on Diane Ravitch and some other people who really have dissected all the fuss about all the kids are dumb for the last 40 years and can't read.
Right.
Because, and I can't remember what's in my own book, I'd have to look it up. But I mean, those terms like proficient, perhaps you recall, I mean, is on the NAEP, proficient refers to, I mean, Ravitch has a very convincing case, others do too, that basically refers to something like an equivalent of, C plus or higher. And then basic is like a C or something, and then below basic is like a D or an F. So when you hear numbers about proficient, at least in reference to the NAEP, I don't know about Wisconsin standardized tests. We have to look at what is the qualitative description of the word proficient, right? Because it could mean something akin to a decent, adjective, or akin to a B or a B minus grade or something.
Well, I think it's, when I take all of those documents that I just mentioned to you,
Yeah.
when I take them to reading interventionists, the reading folks that are here talking today, on their level, in Wisconsin,
Yeah.
I understand that, they say proficient needs to understand the word, to be fully informed citizen. Of those forms I just mentioned, basic, low basic, according to Wisconsin standards, don't even touch those forms. And so, with Wisconsin and how we define the word proficient,
Yeah.
using those forms, our rental agreement, the medical thing we sign when you go to the emergency room, the ballot language that is on the referendums, reading interventions say, according to Wisconsin standards, minimum proficient. Minimum.
To read that stuff and understand that stuff.
And be an informed
Like you
citizen.
say, not just read, but the comprehension.
Yes,
piece.
right. So,
Right.
knowing that with those same standards, people are getting high school certificates, not being able to,
But that won't look good for the school if they don't pass.
well, that we've made up, we've convinced school leaders that that's true, it simply is not. Because everybody gets 20 years in Wisconsin, everybody gets 20 years of free education, and no one has been given permission to give a diploma to somebody that we know is not ready. Premature.
But we know it's high school.
Pardon?
But that is what we are doing.
Yes, that's what we are doing, but it has to impact, when I talk to workforce development people, the labor unions here in Wisconsin,
Yeah.
their basic message to me is, tell the public schools, stop hemorrhaging illiteracy into our trades. Their liability was, if you can't read the labels on chemicals that are going to be dangerous, if you put them together, if you can't read the caution sign, if you can't read safety information, you're a liability to us. So you can do both of things. I mean, you can get into the armed services with the ASVAB without being a proficient reader. But then if you go into the armed services and if you come back with a disability, then you're a disabled veteran without literacy. Then look at the job.
And it does start with those earlier years.
Well,
However,
but the graduation piece, I mean,
Right.
that's what Act 20 is. Yeah, Act 20 is focusing on early. I'm talking about exit. I'm talking about the
right,
other.
but
end.
it starts when they're younger, and that
Yes.
foundation is laid, and if they don't have that, so Act 20, I'm hesitant to say it's fabulous, because, hear me out, because in all the countries that do better than us for reading, they don't even start till those kids are 7, because their brains are not ready. So then what you're doing by pressing it down on these, because the big conversation was about 4-year-olds and how 4-year-olds are gonna have this big, huge reading comprehension pushed down on them, and I'm like, this is the, and all of us that remember, like, this feels icky, because it is icky. Because when you're pushing that down on kids who aren't ready for it, you just told them they're dumb. You just told them they're stupid, and those kids now hate reading at 4. And now you have set them up for failure. So Act 20 has some great thoughts and the idea behind it. But when we go to implement it, we have to be very careful about how we're doing it and to ensure that real, true reading starts by being, kids need books in their houses. Dolly Parton's great, she gives out free ones. They need a person who is an adult who can read the book to the child. And it's not just so much about the reading, it's about the sitting together. So maybe you can't read, so now you have YouTube. You can put a book on YouTube, and if you're still sitting there with your child, not giving it to them and doing something else, but sitting with your child in your lap, and you put the subtitles on, that also will help that parent learn the words as well with it. And they're still getting that interaction, because really a lot of it is, it goes back to the feeling of being cared for and loved, and that brings back anybody you know that still reads as an adult. If you ask them, they will say, it's a good memory for me. I always remember the feeling of the good night story and those things. So that's how it starts. We have to respect. And parents don't read paid books anymore or read things or write. So I have parents that are like, my kid's not writing. I'm like, how often do you write? And they look at me and I'm like, how often do you sit down and write on bills? How often do you sit down and write? Well, I never do. I'm like, then why do you think your child thinks it's your child thinks what you do is important? So if they see you typing, they see you doing this, they're not going to do those things. And we can go back and like look at the numbers and stuff. If you actually go back to most states when they started 4K, that's when go ahead 10 years, you're looking at the mental health issues and you're looking at the actual decrease. And a lot of it is, again, not because the idea of early education was bad, it was the way it was implemented. Because we have this thing in our head that if you sit and drill, you're going to learn it. I'm sorry, circle time. We do it ourselves. People that do circle time with 1-year-olds. Why? They do not need 6 years to learn how to read a calendar. If you wait until they're in first grade, they'll get it in 5 minutes. You didn't need to have them practice it for 6 years. So the same thing kind of goes down with math and other things. For math, for my kids, we do it naturally. They count their friends, they count out the dishes, and they place 1-to-1 correspondent by setting the table. They're not learning math. And they're learning it's important. And so that's a lot of it, is we need to make sure that our teachers are also trusted to be teachers. They have all these canned curriculums. I'm sorry, the social emotional curriculums that these school districts are paying tens of thousands of dollars for, that have these kids watch a video of how to interact, is such a waste of money. But the people, the powers that be, have convinced them that this is the way to do it. But you give that same group of kids 60 minutes to play, they are going to have arguments, they are going to have to problem solve, they're going to have to work things out, they're going to have to use their imaginations, and they are going to learn more in that 60 minutes than they would for 60 minutes in front of a computer. And it's because we don't trust the teachers to do the teaching, because they can't do a checklist off of that, the play. And so really, it's really looking holistically at our entire education system and how we fund
A
it.
lot of times the 4K kids don't even get outside.
Yeah, the 4-year-olds aren't getting outside at all day long.
Which is crazy.
Yeah.
It's not healthy.
Well, and you wonder why we have behavior problems. I can't sit inside all day. Yep. Did you have something?
Yeah, well, I have so many questions, and we're almost over. Or we are over. But I guess I'm curious about you talk about if we trusted teachers, organizing efforts, trusting, faculty. I'd love to hear more about those organizing efforts or shifting narratives that y'all are trying to do, and maybe there are ties across the board here. Because I don't think early childhood educators, care providers are trusted or believe that your work is.
We are by the parents because they're leaving us with their most valuable.
Right.
But the others don't trust us.
Well, there's also.
And they don't trust the parents necessarily to make a good decision about where they're putting their child.
And you hear a lot of policymakers that say, well, my parents did this, or I did this, and they're also, 80 years old and telling us this thing, and we're like, well, things aren't the same anymore, you can't. Just like you can't buy a house anymore like you used to. So there's that narrative. There is honestly still the narrative that women should be home raising their children too. And that's fine if you have a choice, but it's not a choice for many families. And it's the early child care, the funding, the education, it should not be a partisan, issue, but we have created it to be, our policymakers have created this, and it's not helpful. And we've seen that both with Democrats and Republicans too, pitting us against each other for the same funding. Like why, some of the bills that we had, some of the, the 4K bill, the Dems did not sign onto a a bill that was presented that would have been helpful. Because they thought it was taking away from the K through 12 system. And it's like, that's not helpful. So I think if you're asking like what we're trying to do, for Corinne and I, it is bringing awareness. We created a network of not only people like us in programs, but our parents too. We're trying to make our parents aware that it doesn't have to be like this, like that the United States is one of the worst countries for funding our education systems, and it shouldn't have to be this way. You shouldn't have to choose between childcare or your health insurance or food or taking your kids to the dentist, and that's what families are having to choose. And in the panel, we talked about public goods. Childcare is a public good. Our goal would be for it to be free for parents, that we would be treated very similar to the K through 12 system, not in a school, but appropriately done, where parents have a choice again, where they can go put their child in a home if they think that's the best place, keep their child home if they want, or put their child in a group setting, that it should be a choice for their child's education at that age, and it's not a choice.
Same thing with higher ed, it should also be free because again, it contributes to the greater good, the public good. We all need doctors, we all need sociologists, we all need, therapists, all of us need all of these things, and it doesn't make sense the way that we fund it, or don't fund it, I should say.
Yeah,
That sounds like a good note. Since we have a quick break and then the final session that Heather, of course, is asking us all to attend for her birthday.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah,